I can still smell the starch on his dress shirt when I close my eyes. Tuesday 9:17 a.m. The house holding its breath the way big houses do when children are at school, and the dishwasher is humming like an alibi. I was standing in our closet, my closet really, because I'd calibrated every shelf and drawer to his preferences for 15 years, gathering a pile for the dry cleaner. My fingers brushed the canvas lip of his gym bag, tucked behind the neat row of polished Oxfords, and the zipper surrendered with a small, traitorous sigh. I'm a 39-year-old woman who can catalog her life by laundry baby spit-up that marked the year we survived twin infancy, the detergent that smelled like lemons during residency, starch for gala season, and now a red so brazen it felt like a stranger was breathing behind me. Blood-red lipstick on crisp white cotton. I don't scream when I'm ambushed. I freeze. It's how I've survived. So I stood there, shirt dangling from my hand, the closet spinning through all the rooms of our life, the nursery with the 2 cribs I'd measured 12 times, the piano where Emma's small fingers haltingly found Fur Elise, the kitchen table where we'd blown out candles on precisely frosted cakes. The lipstick was not a mistake. No surgeon wears that shade into an operating room. No husband comes home with another woman's mouth pressed like a stamp of ownership over his chest. You'd think I would have felt rage immediately. Instead, what rose up was a sad, prim instinct I learned as a girl: smooth the fabric. Make it right. Don't make trouble. I tucked the shirt back like burying a small body and folded the rest of the laundry. My movements precise, my face composed in the mirror, because I knew the face he wanted to see when he glanced at me. Jennifer, the reliable shadow. Jennifer, the woman who hosts, remembers board members' wives' names, fills the silence. When conversation falters, thanks donors covers every base, so a brilliant husband can focus on saving lives. For 15 years, I'd been the scaffolding no one noticed until a building falls. The house smelled like coffee when he left, and I kept my routine because I couldn't yet bear to betray it. After school drop-off, after the groceries, after writing the twins' permission slips, and leaving a little note in Emma's backpack because she gets anxious before piano lessons, I set out his favorite mug, warmed the milk, and stood for a beat with his phone in my hand. I am not a woman who checks phones. That sentence lived in me like a creed. I believed trust was sacred and privacy was a kind of love. But the screen lit up with a casual, obscene intimacy that felt like the lipstick had grown fingers and tapped my shoulder. Dr. Rebecca Harrington last night was amazing. When are you leaving her? It was not the words, it was the ease how the question assumed a world in which I'd been written out. I scrolled, stomach dropping, past a low, hollow floor I didn't know was there, and read a conversation that went back 8 months. Photos always in flattering lighting. Plans whispered over the top of my life come by after the fundraiser. She's planning a surprise, poor thing. Cruel little stage directions for a play in which I had been demoted to extra. That night, after bedtime stories and the small ferocity of tucking blankets around sleeping children, I asked him in our room, the room that had held the best and worst of us, the miscarriages, the IVF injections, the dreams pinned up in lists and calendars and mortgage payments. "Are you sleeping with Rebecca Harrington?" My voice surprised me. It didn't tremble. He took off his watch, always the watch, first precision, masquerading as decency, and placed it on the nightstand like an offering. "Yes," he said, a single syllable cool as a scalpel. "How long?" "Does it matter?" He watched me with a tired impatience that made me feel for the first time in my life like a domestic inconvenience. "I want a divorce." It wasn't a confession. It was a verdict handed down in a courtroom where I had never been allowed to speak. When I asked why, he gestured vaguely as if the walls themselves were guilty. "I've outgrown this life. I've given 15 years. I'm 45. If I'm going to start over, it needs to be now." He used the tone he reserves for interns, who will never be surgeons. And when I listed the years I'd spent learning how to be the entire backstage of his brilliance, the dinners I'd orchestrated, the holidays around his call schedule, the career I set aside, he laughed. Not unkindly, and asked what I do that couldn't be replaced by a good nanny and a competent accountant. There are moments you prepare for without knowing you're training. Every time I swallowed a hurt to keep the peace. Every time I smiled in a photo where he looked like a man worth admiring. Every time I told the children daddy's late because people need him. Those were push-ups for this. He slept in the guest room. I lay in the dark counting my heartbeats as if they could stitch me back together, and understood that a clean break would be too merciful. I did not want revenge the way movies portray it, glittering, dramatic, immediate. I wanted the truth to speak in a voice so undeniable that it would alter the shape of the world we lived in. The next morning, the kitchen counter held a business card for his lawyer, like a place card at a dinner I had not been invited to. I picked it up with 2 fingers and set it in the drawer where I keep batteries and warranties for appliances that never break. Patricia Winter's office smelled like old wood and money. I chose her because other wives whispered that she was ruthless, and ruthlessness in the right woman is just a synonym for mercy. Document everything she said, sliding a legal pad toward me, especially the finances. At home that night, I opened the safe. 15 years of our life paper-clipped. As I sorted threads, darkened and pulled. Monthly withdrawals in neat round sums, 5, 7.5, 10,000 to an entity called Riverside Holdings. No clear invoices, no explanations. Over 2 years, $250,000 had evaporated into a company in his name alone. The numbers felt like bruises. You don't see the deepest ones forming, and then you can't bear the touch. Patricia adjusted her reading glasses and examined the statements with the same attention he gives to an angiogram. He's hiding assets, she said, not unkindly. And the pattern suggests something older, more deliberate. Names surface unbidden when the ground tilts. The doctor who once stood awkwardly at our fundraisers, always a beat behind whatever joke was being told. The colleague who left without a farewell party. The person he called a good surgeon, who couldn't handle pressure. Dr. Nathan Brooks. Patricia raised the name as if collecting facts were a game she had already won. Former colleague. Left 3 years ago under interesting circumstances. I remembered him as a quiet man whose hands looked steady even when he sipped coffee. The receptionist at his modest clinic sounded like a woman who had learned how to guard a gentle man. She relented when I spoke my husband's name, and then there he was on the phone, voice careful. "Mrs. Carter?" he said softly, and I heard a sorrow that felt older than my marriage. "I've been expecting your call." We met at a coffee shop that served 2 strong espresso and cinnamon rolls as big as a newborn's head. He looked like someone had wrung him out and hung him up, still damp lines deeper than his year's hair graying at the edges of a conscientious haircut. "I knew this day would come," he said. "I just didn't know whether my conscience would break first or William's arrogance." He did not reach for my hand. He didn't have to. He told me about the fertility clinic at Ashford, the one that framed our miracles as statistics and our failures as necessary steps toward success. He told me about irregularities that sounded small until he said the words out loud. Falsified results, substituted specimens, success rates, doctored to keep funding and prestige flowing like champagne at the gala, where I smiled in a dress I couldn't breathe in. When he said Dr. Mercer's name, the past rearranged itself into a pattern I had refused to see: the nurse who had spoken too quickly with sympathy after our second failed round. The way he had soothed me by promising the next cycle would be more carefully managed. The look William had avoided when I asked whether his heart condition, mild genetic, a whispered 50% chance, could be passed on. William knew Dr. Brooks, said, finally, laying a small black thumb drive on the table between us, as if it were something living and dangerous. Hospital records, lab reports. His signature authorizing procedural modifications, the euphemism you use when you cannot bear to name the thing you are doing. My hand trembled, not because I was afraid, but because my body understood before my mind admitted it, our twins' conception after months of grief. Emma's tiny fingers wrapped around mine, the stories we told at holidays about stubborn embryos finally deciding to stay. Why, I asked, and my voice held every quiet I have ever kept. He considered his coffee, originally career advancement. Mercer sat on the board that later promoted him to chief. Later, He'd become very comfortable with controlling outcomes. He paused as if entering a room no one wants to visit, and he was adamant about not passing along his condition. You know what that implies. It implies that during the most vulnerable holy days of my life, the days I learned to aim a needle at my own stomach, the days I prayed to anything listening while watching a monitor flicker with the faintest spark of a future, my husband arranged for his sperm to never touch mine. It implies that he built a family on a lie he told himself counted as love because it avoided risk and secured the image he needed to be applauded. I didn't cry at the cafe. I asked Dr. Brooks for a recommendation for discreet genetic testing, and he slid a card across. He looked relieved, which is another way of saying he'd wanted to be believed for a very long time. That night, the house made its small night sounds refrigerator soft as breathing. A distant car wind fussing the trees in our manicured yard, and I moved through it with a calm that felt like standing in the eye of a storm I had finally located on a map. I collected strands of hair from brushes and tucked damp toothbrushes in labeled bags. I took one of his combs from the bathroom he had abandoned for the guest bath and slipped it into the envelope like a relic. It was obscene and tender at once, this gathering of evidence from the bodies I love. Then I sat at the kitchen table and opened my laptop. While custody evaluators scheduled appointments and his lawyer's letters questioned my emotional stability and financial dependence in the polite vocabulary of legalized cruelty, I read about fertility fraud, the way some people read about unsolved crimes at midnight. Doctors using their own sperm. Embryos mixed up parents discovering the truth decades later. But nowhere did I find my story. A husband who intentionally ensured his children wouldn't be his, not because he didn't want them, but because he wanted something more than them: control over how he would be seen. 2 weeks is a long time when you are waiting to find out if the person you married rewrote your biology. He became generous in the public ways men become generous when they want to be admired for their magnanimity. He offered settlements that were insulting in a way that could pass as reasonable if you squinted. He brought Rebecca to school functions as if onboarding were the same as mothering. He texted me requests with the confidence of a man who thinks the story has already been written. I complied where it served me, said no where it mattered, and learned the difference between execution and patience. I told myself in the mirror where I once checked lipstick before fundraisers that grief can calcify into a bone that holds you upright. The email arrived on a Tuesday morning. The voice on the phone was gentle, professional, as if she kept a collection of tones for bad news. We can email the results, she offered. I wanted to see the language to feel the cold of it. When the PDF opened, the clinical certainty was almost indecent. The alleged father is excluded as the biological father of the tested children. The probability of paternity is 0%. I printed 3 copies, one for my lawyer, one for the safe deposit box in my name only, and one I slid into a cream envelope embossed with the Ashford Medical Center logo I had lifted from his home office, like a woman picking up a weapon that had always been hers to wield. The devastation inside me reassembled into something clear and edged. An affair is a cruelness that can be quantified. This was a foundational betrayal that began before our children had heartbeats. He had taken from me not just fidelity, but choice. He had practiced medicine on our life. I placed the envelope beside my keys and smoothed the air over it, the way I used to smooth bedding before a party. Invisible labors that make rooms gleam. I looked at the photo on the mantel. The 5 of us in matching sweaters. The twins' cowlicks stubborn, Emma's gap-toothed grin, and whispered something I had never said aloud. The truth is love, even when it burns the house down. In the days to come, I would invite the fire. But that morning, I stood very still in my kitchen with the mug he prefers and felt for the first time since I found the lipstick a small, terrible relief. The world had shifted into alignment. The story I would tell would not make me the victim of his choices. It would make me the author of the ending. When the results came back, I didn't cry. I read the sterile line, "The alleged father is excluded as the biological father." 3 times, the words flattening everything that had been tender in my chest. Then I printed the report, folded it with a surgeon's precision, and slipped it into a cream envelope. Paper can hold more weight than a body when it carries truth. I didn't yet know what to do with that truth, only that I couldn't let it rot inside me. I started small mechanical labeled folders, chronological order receipts of love turned into exhibits of deceit. When William texted about mediation schedules, I replied politely. When he boasted that his lawyer was making progress, I thanked him. I smiled at the school drop-off line and learned how to perform serenity. Beneath it, I sharpened the blade of patience. Patricia examined the report in silence, the corners of her mouth tightening. "This isn't just a divorce," she said finally. "It's malpractice, fraud, medical ethics violations, possibly criminal." Her eyes met mine. "You realize what happens when this comes out?" I nodded. "He loses everything." She hesitated. "And the children. They keep their mother," I said. "The rest was never theirs to lose." That night, after everyone slept, I sat in the living room where every photograph of our family smiled in artificial harmony. I studied each frame like an investigator at a crime scene. The twins' first day of kindergarten, William's hand resting lightly on my shoulder, a man performing affection for the camera. Emma's 7th birthday, his grin wider than hers, like he owned the day. 15 years documented in snapshots, each one a still from a film that was never real. The anger that came was quiet like a fever breaking. He had built an empire on manipulation, not just of me, but of biology, of ethics, of entire families who believed they were holding their own children. I wasn't the only woman who'd been rewritten in the story of his ambition. That realization gave my grief direction. It stopped being personal. It became purpose. I met with Dr. Brooks again, this time in the parking lot behind his clinic. He handed me a list of names, 27 couples treated at Ashford during William's oversight. "Most of them don't want to talk," he warned. "They'd rather not know." "Some will," I said. "Somebody always does." I started calling. Most hung up. Some wept. 5 agreed to meet. The Millers with their twins who looked nothing like them. The Patels with a daughter whose blood type didn't match theirs. The Johnsons who had joked for years about their miracle baby. As I listened, I realized I was collecting pieces of a larger body, one he'd carved without conscience. Then there was Diane Fletcher, a former nurse who had worked at the clinic for over a decade. We met in a small apartment stacked with boxes and file folders that smelled faintly of disinfectant and dust. She looked at me with eyes that had seen too much and been believed too little. "They thought I'd destroyed everything when I left," she said, opening a leather-bound journal. I kept copies. Inside were notes written in a nurse's neat script, patient names, procedural changes, forged signatures. "Dr. Carter specimen replacement authorized." My stomach clenched at the sight of my own name, the dates aligning perfectly with our IVF cycles. "Why didn't you report this?" I asked. "I did," she said bitterly. "Hospital administration buried it. Your husband had friends in the right places." I photographed every page. When I reached the entry that carried my initials, my hands went cold. Special instruction from Dr. Carter himself. Specimen replacement authorized due to quality concerns. No donor identification recorded. Quality concerns. That was the phrase he'd used once when talking about a malfunctioning pacemaker. It hadn't occurred to me that he could apply it to his own wife. Diane pressed a business card into my hand. "Agent Michael Dawson, Healthcare Fraud Division. Tell him I sent you." He met me in a bland government office that smelled of burnt coffee and fluorescent light. "We've been investigating Ashford for 18 months, he said, scrolling through a file on his tablet. "We could never penetrate the confidentiality wall. Your documents might change that." He leaned forward. "But we need corroboration, financial records, witnesses still inside direct admissions." Admissions. I could get those. I'd spent 15 years learning my husband's rhythms, the tempo of his vanity, the pitch of his defensiveness. I could make him talk. So I played the part he expected, the accommodating ex-wife who wanted what's best for the kids. I nodded through mediation sessions, agreed to temporary custody arrangements, even complimented Rebecca's professional grace when she began attending parent-teacher meetings. William's confidence swelled like an infection. He began introducing Rebecca at social gatherings, his hand on her back as though she were a prize he'd earned. Behind my polite smiles, I was recording everything. I bought a voice recorder small enough to hide inside a pendant and guided conversations the way he once guided scalpels. During a casual discussion about the twins' science fair, I asked, "Do you ever worry they might inherit your heart condition?" He looked up sharply. "What hypertrophic cardiomyopathy?" Dr. Brooks mentioned. His face darkened. Brooks should keep his mouth shut. "So it's true," I pressed. "You were tested." He exhaled. "Yes. Mild. Nothing to worry about. I had the kids tested years ago, without telling me I'm their father and a doctor," he said coldly. "I made a medical decision." The recorder captured every word in admission of the condition of unauthorized testing of deceit. Agent Dawson called it gold. By then, Rebecca's background had become another puzzle piece. The private investigator I hired delivered the revelation like a plot twist I might have written if I were crueler. Rebecca was the daughter of Melanie Harrington, a former patient of Williams who had died on his table 5 years earlier. The hospital report blamed her for failing to disclose a medication, but the investigator's notes cross-checked with Dawson's files told another story William had operated after a sleepless weekend spent with Rebecca. The error was his, the cover-up Ashford's. The payout had been generous enough to keep the family silent, until the family wasn't one anymore. Rebecca's father had died of a heart attack a year later. She changed her name, joined the same hospital network, and climbed into the orbit of the man who destroyed her mother. I should have felt kinship. Instead, I felt caution. Her revenge was fire. Mine needed to be ice. The weeks leading up to the annual Ashford Gala became my rehearsal for freedom. I watched from the sidelines as William rehearsed his acceptance speech for Physician of the Year, the same man who once told me medicine isn't about miracles, it's about management. He would speak about ethics, compassion, integrity. The irony was so thick it felt biblical. I met with Agent Dawson and the hospital board chair in a discreet side room hours before the event. Dawson presented the compiled evidence bank transfers to Riverside Holdings. Diane's records recorded admissions, sworn statements. Faces shifted from skepticism to horror. The board agreed public exposure would be more effective than private negotiation. Arrests were scheduled for that night. I dressed carefully, black satin hair swept into a knot he used to say made me look severe. Good. I wanted to look like consequence. When I entered the ballroom, the chandeliers blazed like judgment. William stood near the stage, arm draped around Rebecca's waist, basking in the spotlight of his own myth. I moved among the crowd like a ghost he had forgotten to bury. The award presentation blurred into a theater of hypocrisy. Medicine, he declared, is a sacred trust between doctor and patient. The applause rose hollow and glittering. I caught Rebecca's gaze. For a heartbeat, the room narrowed to the two of us women orbiting the same sun of deceit. After the ceremony, as planned, they went to Vincenzo's, our old restaurant, the one where he'd proposed over Bordeaux and promises. I followed 20 minutes later, the envelope in my clutch, my heartbeat steady. The maitre d' recognized me instantly. "Mrs. Carter. Dr. Carter mentioned you might join them." He smiled. I returned it. Of course he did. They were at our favorite table. He looked up, surprised but smug. "Jennifer, this is unexpected. You told them I might join you," I said. "A courtesy mention. I didn't think you'd actually come." Rebecca shifted uneasily. "Perhaps I should—" "Stay," I said, meeting her eyes. "You've earned your seat." I placed the envelope on the table. "Congratulations on your freedom," I said softly. "You'll find this enlightening." William's hand trembled as he opened it. The color drained from his face as he read. "This is impossible." "Is it?" I asked. "You arranged every procedure, every falsified report. You made sure your sperm was never used. You lied to me, to them, to everyone." Rebecca stared at him. "What is she talking about?" "Nothing," he snapped, voice rising. "Jennifer's unstable. Then you won't mind explaining it to the board, I interrupted, gesturing toward the doorway. Dr. Winters and Agent Dawson stood there, flanked by two officers. Dr. William Carter, Dawson announced, stepping forward. You're under arrest for medical fraud, financial crimes, and ethical violations under the Medical Practice Act. The restaurant fell silent. Forks hovered midair. The man who had mastered every operating room looked suddenly small, surgical precision replaced by panic. You vindictive, careful, I said. Every word is being recorded. As they led him away, Rebecca sat motionless, lips pale. I didn't know about the children, she whispered. I believe you, I said. Your mother deserved justice too. Outside rain began to fall, the first honest sound of the night. The headlines arrived before dawn. Renowned surgeon arrested in fertility fraud scandal. By breakfast, the news anchors were already dissecting my life in perfectly modulated voices. They showed our family photos, the ones with matching sweaters and manicured smiles, and spoke of a shocking double life as if they'd uncovered a celebrity affair, instead of a 15-year dissection of a woman's trust. I watched the television without sound, the twins arguing softly over cereal, Emma humming to herself as she braided her doll's hair. They didn't yet know that their father's face on the screen was more than a story. I switched off the TV and stood by the window watching the rain silver the street. It was the first morning in years that I felt the air belonged to me. The phone vibrated relentlessly. Reporters, distant relatives, people I hadn't heard from since college who suddenly wanted to offer support. Patricia answered most of them. She was almost giddy in her efficiency. You've set a precedent, she said. Do you understand that every ethics board in the country will cite Carter v. Ashford? But I wasn't interested in being precedent. I wanted to build something real out of the ruins. When Agent Dawson called, his voice was both weary and triumphant. We've frozen the offshore accounts. The district attorney's filing multiple felony counts, medical fraud, embezzlement, falsification of records. Mercer's already talking. Will he serve time, I asked. If there's any justice left, yes. But these men, they built an ecosystem of protection. It'll take months. I've waited 15 years, I said. Months are nothing. That night, I poured myself a glass of the cheap red wine he used to mock and sat at the dining table writing a letter to my children. It wasn't meant for now. I sealed it and placed it in the safe to be opened when they were old enough to understand that truth and love can coexist even when truth shatters everything love built. Days blurred into weeks. The world that had once revolved around William's schedule began to tilt back toward something resembling life. The children asked cautious questions. Is Daddy in trouble? Did he do something bad? I chose my words with surgical care. He made mistakes, I said. Big ones. But we're safe. We're together. That was enough for now. The hospital suspended his license within a week. His colleagues scrambled to distance themselves. The house that had once hosted gala dinners, now filled with silence that wasn't heavy anymore. It was clean, empty space. I repainted the walls, pale blue, tore down the framed awards that bore his name, and replaced them with the children's artwork. Emma drew a picture of the five of us, me and the kids holding hands, William in the corner with a cloud above his head. She handed it to me shyly. Is it okay if he's raining? She asked. It's perfect, I told her. When the official indictment came, Patricia called to read the list: 17 counts of fraud, 4 of financial misconduct, 3 of ethical violations. I listened until she finished, then said quietly, that should keep him busy. A week later, I received a letter from Dr. Brooks. Ashford is creating a new ethics committee for reproductive medicine. They asked me to chair it. I'd like you to co-chair. For a long time, I just stared at the words. Co-chair. Not consult, not assist, but stand beside equal. For 15 years, I'd been the woman behind a man who spoke in perfect sentences about morality. Now someone was asking me to speak. I said yes. The first meeting was held in a smaller conference room than I expected. The air hummed with awkward gratitude. We drafted policies that would make consent procedures transparent, financial trails, auditable donors traceable. It was dry work forms, protocols, but beneath it pulsed something alive, a collective refusal to let silence be standard. When I signed the final document, I realized my signature no longer shook. 6 months passed before I saw Rebecca again. We met of all places at a cafe near the courthouse. She approached with hesitation, her hair darker now, her posture subdued. "You look different," she said. "So do you." She sat down, folded her hands. "I wanted to say thank you. You did what I couldn't. You started it," I admitted. "Your mother's death deserved truth. I just finished the surgery." She smiled faintly. "They offered me immunity in exchange for testimony. I took it." "You should. I kept wondering if you'd hate me." "I don't," I said. "You were part of his story, but you're not part of mine anymore." For a while we just sat in silence, two women bound by the same wound, now finally free of its stitching. Before she left, she asked, "Do you regret it?" I thought of the children, their laughter returning like sunlight after storm clouds of the nights. I no longer waited for footsteps that never came. "No," I said. "I regret not knowing sooner." The trial began on a crisp autumn morning. I didn't attend the opening statements. I didn't need to hear him explain himself. But I did go once on the third day when Diane Fletcher testified. She spoke with trembling dignity, reading from the journal she had hidden for years. William sat across from her, thinner, now his hands folded in the same pose he'd used for every hospital portrait. When Diane finished, their eyes met, and for the first time I saw something like fear in his. He took the stand the following week. His lawyer's strategy was predictable. He'd been overworked, manipulated by Mercer, blinded by ambition. "I made mistakes," he said, "but I never meant to hurt anyone." The jury looked unmoved. His words sounded like lines from a script he'd rehearsed too often. When the verdict came guilty on all major counts, I felt no triumph, only a deep, settling quiet. Justice isn't loud. It's the sound of something heavy being set down. Afterward, the press waited outside the courthouse. Microphones thrust toward my face. Questions flying. "Do you forgive him? Will you change your children's last name? How does it feel to win?" I gave them the only answer that mattered. This was never about winning. It was about telling the truth. Then I walked past them into the sunlight. That night, the kids and I baked cookies, real ones, the way we used to before I learned how fragile peace can be. The kitchen filled with butter and laughter, and for once no ghosts lingered in the corners. Later, when they slept, I stepped out onto the porch. The wind carried the scent of rain again, but this time it didn't feel ominous. It felt clean. I looked up at the stars and thought of the version of me who once stood frozen in a closet, holding a lipstick-stained shirt, and believing her world had ended. She had no idea it was just beginning. To everyone who's ever been lied to, gaslighted, or made to feel small inside their own life, you are not the sum of someone else's choices. You can start again, and you can build something truer from what broke you. If this story touched you, please like, share, and subscribe. Your support helps more voices rise from silence, one truth at a time.